The winter wind swept down from the gray ridges, carrying with it a bitter chill, and the dry rasp of tumbleweeds tumbling across the wooden boards of Frontier Creek Station. The train had just pulled away, leaving behind a haze of black smoke that hung stubbornly in the pale sky. On one of the benches sat a young woman, her hands trembling as they clutched the thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her name was Elena Ramirez, only 22 years old, and this was the farthest she had ever traveled from Philadelphia. All she had carried with her was a single worn satchel and the fragile hope that someone here would be waiting to build a new life with her. That hope had shattered in an instant. In her pocket was a crumpled letter, its blunt words cutting deeper than any blade. "I am sorry, but I cannot accept you. Your heritage is not suitable. A train will take you back east tomorrow." Every penny she had saved from years of needlework, every dream she had pinned to this journey, all undone by a stranger's cold rejection. People passed her by without so much as a glance. In this land of broken promises, a forsaken bride was hardly unusual. Elena lowered her head, forcing back tears that threatened to spill, and then, like a whisper carried by the wind, came a small voice beside her. "Are you sad, miss?" She turned and met the wide eyes of a boy no more than 6 years old. His hair was a tangle of pale strands, his jacket threadbare, his boots coated in dust. In his arms he clutched a wooden toy horse with its tail broken off, holding it as if it were treasure. "I saw you sitting alone," the boy said earnestly. "My mom always told me if you see someone who looks sad, you should ask if they are all right." A pang of warmth pierced through Elena's despair. She managed a thin smile, nodding slightly, too choked with grief to explain. The boy sat beside her without hesitation, rocking his toy back and forth in silence, as if his simple company was enough. A heavy stride echoed across the platform. Boots struck the planks in deliberate rhythm, each step carrying weight. A tall figure approached, broad-shouldered, his coat worn from the trail, a cowboy hat shadowing half his weathered face. When his eyes found the boy, his pace quickened. "Samuel," he said, "I told you to wait by the post." His voice was deep, roughened by long days in the saddle, yet not unkind. The boy tilted his head up, unafraid. "She was sad, Papa, so I came." The man halted, gaze shifting from his son to Elena, and something softened in his expression. He lifted his hat, revealing dark hair, streaked faintly with gray, and eyes shadowed by weariness. "Ethan Clark. He said I'm this boy's father. I hope he hasn't troubled you." Elena shook her head quickly. "No, he has been kind." Then almost shyly, she added, "My name is Elena Ramirez." Ethan's eyes flicked to the letter clenched in her hand, the one she had been too heartbroken to hide. He seemed to understand without asking. "Promises in this land," he said quietly, "they're spoken too easily and kept too seldom." Her chest tightened. She wanted to answer, but her throat burned. Samuel leaned closer, whispering with childlike sincerity, "If you don't have a place to go, we have a room at home. Papa can build stables, but he can't cook at all." A laugh escaped her lips, light and broken, carrying both sorrow and gratitude. Ethan's brows lifted in surprise at his son's words, as if he meant to correct him, but the protest never came. Instead, there was a flicker in his gaze, a silent hesitation that felt like the earth shifting beneath them. In that fleeting moment, Elena sensed something neither of them had planned for, something waiting at the edge of fate, ready to change 3 lives forever. The road from the station unspooled in a long ribbon of dust, winding between scrub and low hills, the sky pressing down in a pale lid of cold light. Samuel perched between Elena and Ethan on the wagon seat, tiny fingers curled around the edge, his wooden horse tucked under one arm. The mule snorted clouds into the air, and the reins creaked in Ethan's hands. He spoke little, but he kept glancing sidelong at Elena, as if measuring the weight of her silence, as if listening for the sound of something breaking inside her that he might be able to mend. After a time, he said, "There is coffee at the house and bread from 2 days ago, hard around the edges, but not yet fit for the chickens." Samuel chimed in. "He tried to make stew last week, but it tasted like rainwater and smoke." Elena let out a small laugh that surprised her. The sound felt like a match struck in a dark room. "I can cook," she said simply, and then her throat tightened again. She did not want to reveal how much she wanted to belong, how much she feared the morning train and the emptiness waiting beyond it. They reached a shallow ford and the mule splashed through, sending up arcs that glittered in the weak sun. Far off, a line of mountains sat like folded arms. A hawk turned slow circles above the cottonwoods. The land looked indifferent to sorrow too vast for it. Elena felt smaller with every mile, yet the boy's shoulder pressed warm against her sleeve, and that steady touch kept her from drifting away into despair. The Clark place appeared near dusk, a low house of weathered boards with a lean-to kitchen and a deep porch, a corral out back that held two horses in the beginnings of a new stall. Fences stretched in tired lines, some posts slanting like old men. The yard bore the marks of labor done in haste, laundry pole askew. An empty wash tub overturned tools resting where a hand had put them down and not picked them up for days. It was not a pretty homestead, but it breathed of trying, of pushing back at loneliness with work. Elena climbed down, and the earth felt solid in a way the platform had not. Samuel tugged her hand, dragging her to the kitchen door with excited urgency. He announced, "This is the kitchen, and this is the stove that eats wood faster than Papa can cut it, and that shelf keeps falling down if you put the iron pan on the left side." Ethan coughed as if to hide a smile. "If you do not mind, Miss Ramirez, we can settle terms after you have eaten. There is some work to be done if you choose to stay a few days." There is always work. Inside the kitchen smelled of ash and old onions. A kettle waited on the back of the stove, a sack of flour sat open on the table, and a chipped crock of salt huddled next to a jar of beans. Elena set her satchel near the door, rolled up her sleeves and took stock the way a seamstress counts thread before pulling a needle. She found dried sage in a tin, a heel of bacon wrapped in cloth carrots that had gone soft at the tips but were still sweet at the core. She moved without asking permission, and the room seemed to right itself around her. Water into the pot, bacon at the bottom, carrots, a fist of beans, a whisper of sage. Then she cut stale bread and rubbed the slices with a clove of garlic she discovered in the darkest corner of the shelf. The kettle began to murmur and then to sing. Samuel hovered like a small star, shedding brightness. He asked question after question about trains, about cities, about whether Philadelphia had as many horses as the whole territory. Elena answered in gentle pieces as she stirred the pot, careful not to let her voice catch on the places where her life had frayed. Ethan stacked wood outside, steady thought. Thok of the axe, the rhythm of a man teaching his body to carry what his heart could not say. By the time night gathered against the window panes, the stew had thickened into something comforting and real. They ate at the plain table, and Elena watched the way Samuel leaned into his father, without thinking, the way Ethan steadied the boy's cup without looking. Those small movements stitched them together right there before her eyes. When the bowls were empty, Elena stood to wash up, but Ethan stopped her. "You are a guest until we agree otherwise," he said. She shook her head. "Let me," she replied softly, and he did not argue again. After the washing was done, the house grew quiet. Outside, coyotes called far off, the sound thin as needles. The mule stamped once in the yard. Ethan showed Elena a modest room just off the porch, a place likely meant for hired hands with a narrow bed, a small trunk, and a crooked nail pounded into the wall to hold a shawl. He looked about to apologize for its sparseness, but Elena said thank you and meant it. He nodded, then hesitated at the door. "The morning train leaves at 7, he said just once, no more words attached to it. She felt the sentence land in her chest like a stone set on top of a letter to keep it from blowing away. Sleep did not come easily. Elena lay listening to the house breathe boards, settling the faint scrape of mouse feet somewhere between walls. Her hands remembered the texture of fabric and thread, the steady certainty of seam and hem, all the small order she had left behind. The letter in her satchel rustled when a draft stirred under the door, as if the ugly words could not be content to lie still. Not suitable, not wanted, not for us. She pressed her palms over her ears, as if that could block the memory of the lines. Near midnight, a horse pounded down the road, hooves clapping like angry hands. Elena sat up. The animal skidded to a halt outside, and a voice called for Ethan, rough and urgent. Another voice followed, lower, colder, the kind that did not warm, even when it spoke a name. Elena crept to the edge of her door and peered through the crack toward the yard. Moonlight lay across the porch in a long, pale blade. Ethan stepped out, pulling his coat around his shoulders, and Samuel's face blinked in the window behind him. Go small and worried. The men in the yard belonged to town. Elena could tell by their hats stiff and proper, and by the way one of them kept his hands tucked into a fine coat, as if dirt itself might rise up and stain him. The one who had shouted first was Deputy Marshal Hale, a man built like a fence post, straight and hard. The other wore a neat beard and a look of mild disgust. Elena did not need to hear his name to know him. She had seen his handwriting. Ethan kept his voice level. "Gentlemen, it is late." The bearded man said there was a woman at the station this afternoon, a woman of mixed heritage. He rolled the words in his mouth like something bitter. "She boarded a wagon with you. She is not wanted in this town. You will bring her back to the platform at dawn so the train can carry her back east." His tone suggested a simple arrangement, as though he were scheduling the delivery of a crate and not the fate of a human being. Elena felt heat climb her neck. She nearly stepped into the moonlight. But Ethan spoke first, even unhurried. "The station master told me the train comes at 7, he said, and if a paying passenger chooses to board, that is between her and the railroad. As for who eats under my roof or rides in my wagon, that is between me and my God." Deputy Hale shifted uncomfortable between these two kinds of men, one who threw money and one who stood his ground. The bearded man's eyes thinned. He said, "There are expectations in a respectable community." Ethan replied, "A community is only respectable if it respects." The mule snorted as if it agreed. Silence widened, brittle and sharp. Then the men turned their horses, their departure carving ruts through the yard. When Ethan came back inside, Elena had stepped away from the door and sat on the edge of the bed, hands clenched. He paused outside her room as if deciding whether to knock. Finally he said through the wood sleep, "If you can, tomorrow's a long day." His footsteps retreated down the hall. After a time the house settled again. Dawn came with a blade of pale gold cutting along the floorboards. Elena rose, washed her face in cold water until her skin burned and tied her hair back. She moved like a woman who had already chosen, though she had not yet spoken the choice aloud, not even to herself. In the kitchen she lit the stove-set coffee to boil sliced bread, thin, and toasted it on the iron, and stewed down the last of the bacon into gravy that tasted of stubborn hope. Samuel shuffled in, rubbing his eyes, hair wild, clutching his wooden horse. He leaned into her side without a word, and she felt the small trust of it, simple and whole. Ethan appeared at the doorway, and the room felt a fraction steadier for his presence. No one mentioned the train. No one mentioned the men. They ate quickly, as people do on mornings when the earth might tilt. When the dishes were washed and stacked, Elena went to her small room and lifted the satchel, then set it down again. She took the letter out and stared at the words until they blurred. Then she folded it small and tucked it under the mattress, a pressed leaf of something that had once been alive and was now only a memory. She stepped into the yard where the mule waited, steam rising from its back, and the road unrolled toward town like a dare. "We should go," Ethan said. His voice was neutral, a field of snow without tracks. Elena climbed up to the wagon seat. Samuel wedged himself beside her, and they set off toward the station, toward the place where people board trains and leave and sometimes return and sometimes find the life they did not expect, waiting with its arms open and its questions sharp as winter air. The wagon wheels rattled over ruts as they drew nearer to the station. The sun was just climbing, pale and hesitant, painting the frost on fence rails with a thin, silver sheen. Elena's heart pounded louder than the creak of the harness, each rotation of the wheels carrying her closer to the choice that waited. Samuel leaned against her side, humming tunelessly, clutching his toy horse as if it could shield him from the weight pressing on the adults around him. Ethan drove with his jaw, set eyes fixed on the road's shoulders tight, as if the leather reins were holding back more than the mule. The town appeared in pieces, a water tower dark against the horizon, then rooftops sagging under years of weather, then the station platform itself. A small crowd had already gathered, though no train yet whistled in the distance. Men stood with folded arms, women with shawls drawn close, all whispering like leaves rustling in a restless wind. Elena felt every gaze on her the moment the wagon rolled into view. The whispers grew louder, sharper, as though the sight of her confirmed some suspicion they had nursed all night. Ethan reined in, the mule jaw working. He helped Samuel down first, then turned to Elena. She stepped carefully onto the boards, her boots striking hollow against the platform. She forced her shoulders straight, though her stomach twisted. The bearded man was there, Mr. Harlan the rancher, who had summoned her with promises and then sent her away with a single sheet of rejection. His coat was too fine for the dust of this place, his expression sour with indignation. Beside him stood Deputy Hale, a low hand resting near the butt of his revolver, as if this were a matter of law rather than pride. Mr. Harlan's voice carried, "You are here, Miss Ramirez, just as you should be. The 7 o'clock will take you back east. I have done my part by arranging your ticket, though I will never understand why you thought to deceive me with silence about your heritage." He said the word like a curse, and the crowd rippled with unease. Elena clenched her fist, biting down the words that wanted to spill words about dignity, about promises, about the cruelty of judging love by blood. But before she could speak, Ethan stepped forward. His tone was calm, but it carried iron. "She deceived no one. You assumed what you wanted, and when the truth did not fit your fancy, you discarded her as if she were goods from a catalog." His voice rang against the wooden walls of the station, and a hush fell. Some heads turned, some eyes dropped, but Harlan's face only darkened. "This is none of your affair, Clark," he spat. "The woman is free to board the train. You would be wise not to interfere." Samuel tugged on Elena's skirt, eyes wide with confusion. He whispered, "Are they sending you away, Miss Elena?" The sound of his small voice cut deeper than Harlan's words. Elena knelt, brushing hair from his forehead. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," she said softly. The whistle of the train pierced the morning long and mournful, echoing off the hills. Smoke curled above the treetops, the engine rounding the bend with relentless inevitability. The platform shivered beneath its approach. Harlan straightened his coat and gestured sharply toward the oncoming cars. "This is the end of it," he declared. Ethan placed a steady hand on Elena's shoulder, and she looked up into his eyes. There was no command in them, only a question, fierce and quiet. "Do you want to go?" Her throat tightened. The answer trembled on her lips, but before she could release it, the train screeched into the station, steam billowing like a curtain pulled across the stage. Doors opened, conductors called, passengers hurried. The crowd pressed closer, eager to see the spectacle of a woman cast out. Elena gripped her satchel, her knuckles white, and took one step toward the train. Harlan smiled, thin and cruel. But then Samuel's hand slipped into hers, small and desperate. His whisper barely rose above the hiss of the engine. "Please don't go. Mama left already. Don't go too." Tears stung Elena's eyes. She looked again at Ethan, at the man who had given her shelter without condition, whose boy clung to her as if his life might unravel if she left. She realized then that the letter in her satchel did not own her fate, that Harlan's words did not shape the truth of who she was. The conductor called final boarding. The train loomed, its door yawning wide, the promise of escape and exile both. Elena's chest heaved. She drew in a breath and let the satchel slide from her hand to the platform boards. It landed with a dull thud, and the sound cracked through the air louder than the train's whistle. Gasps scattered the crowd. Harlan's face flushed with outrage. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his eyes held something brighter, something steadier than surprise. Samuel gripped her hand tighter, hope flooding his small face. Elena straightened and said clearly enough for all to hear, "I will not board. Not today. Not ever at your command." The whistle shrieked again. The train shuddered and the cars began to roll forward. Steam wrapped around the platform, blinding and cold. When it cleared, the train was gone, and Elena stood rooted on the boards. Her choice made her heart racing. Harlan stepped forward, fists clenched, but Ethan moved between them, his presence unshakable. "You've had your say, Harlan," he said, voice low but firm. "Now leave her be." The crowd lingered, murmuring uncertain, but none dared cross Ethan. Harlan's lips curled, but he turned sharply and stalked away, the deputy trailing after him. Slowly the others dispersed, though their whispers clung like smoke in the air. Elena stood trembling, the emptiness of the departing train echoing in her chest. Yet when Samuel wrapped both arms around her waist and Ethan's hand steadied her shoulder, she realized she had not been left behind. She had stayed with them, and perhaps that was where her journey had always been leading. The platform emptied slowly, footsteps fading until only the three of them remained. Elena could still feel the weight of all those stares, the judgment pressed against her skin like thorns. She bent down to lift her satchel again, but Ethan shook his head gently and picked it up for her. Come, he said quietly. The wagon is waiting. The road back to the ranch felt different than it had that morning. The land was unchanged, the dry grass, the wide sky, the hawk circling far above. But inside Elena there was a tremor, the sense of stepping off a ledge without knowing if there would be ground beneath her feet. She had chosen to stay, but staying meant standing against the town, against Harlan, against every whisper that called her unworthy. Samuel, oblivious to the storm around them, hummed softly, swinging his toy horse as the wagon jolted along. He leaned against Elena, as though he had always known she would not leave. Ethan drove in silence, his jaw still set, but when the wagon turned toward the hills, he glanced at her, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes. When they reached the ranch, the sun was sinking, staining the land in blood red and gold. Elena stepped down, her legs trembling from more than the ride. Ethan unloaded a sack of grain, his movements deliberate, controlled, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. She wanted to thank him, to speak of the choice she had made, but words tangled in her throat. Instead, she followed Samuel into the house, where the warmth of the hearth was already burning low. That night, over a simple meal, the silence pressed heavy. Samuel prattled happily, talking of school books, of a calf born last spring, of how he wanted to learn to ride like his papa. Ethan listened with a faint smile, but his gaze kept drifting to Elena. When Samuel finally drifted off to sleep, his head pillowed on his folded arms at the table, Ethan rose and carried him gently to bed. When he returned, Elena was still seated, twisting her hands together. He paused by the doorway, then stepped closer. "You made a choice today?" he said, voice low, and it was not an easy one. "I will not ask why not yet, but know this: Harlan will not forget. He will stir the town against you, against me, against the boy." Elena lifted her chin, though her heart pounded. "Then let him," she whispered. "I will not live bound by his cruelty." Ethan studied her for a long moment, the firelight carving shadows across his face. Finally, he nodded once, as though her answer had settled something inside him. Days passed. Elena rose before dawn, tending the stove, mending clothes, helping with the animals when she could. The ranch, once weary and neglected, seemed to breathe easier with her presence. Samuel blossomed under her care, his laughter bright, his hair braided clumsily at first until she showed him how it should be done. Ethan worked alongside her in quiet companionship, and though few words passed between them, each glance carried more than speech could hold. Yet the shadow of Harlan lingered. Riders were spotted near the property lines, men who never came close enough to speak, but close enough to remind them they were being watched. Once Elena found a note tacked to the fence post, "Go home before worse comes." Ethan burned it without a word, but the fire in his eyes said enough. One evening, as the wind howled outside and the shutters rattled, Samuel crept to Elena's side, clutching his toy horse. He asked softly, "Will you still be here tomorrow?" The question pierced her. She drew him close, whispering always. Ethan, standing in the doorway, heard her promise. His eyes softened, the hardness in his face easing for the first time since she had known him. But peace was fragile. A week later, as Elena hung laundry in the yard, 3 riders appeared at the edge of the property. Harlan among them, his fine coat catching the sun, his sneer unmistakable even from a distance. Elena's breath caught. Ethan strode from the barn, rifle slung casually across his shoulder. Harlan called out, his voice dripping disdain. "Still here, Miss Ramirez? Do you think you belong hiding behind a widower and his child? You will bring trouble to this land, mark me." Elena's hands shook, but she did not step back. Ethan raised his voice steady as stone. "This land is mine, Harlan. She is under my roof, and my roof is not yours to govern." The standoff stretched, wind tugging at coats, horses stamping nervously. Finally, Harlan spat into the dust, turned his mount, and rode off with his men. But the message was clear. This was not finished. That night, Elena could not sleep. She stood by the window, watching the moon drift through ragged clouds. Ethan entered quietly, leaning against the frame. "They will not stop," she murmured. He nodded. "No, they won't." Then after a pause, he added, "But neither will we." She turned to him, the firelight from the hearth spilling across his face. And for the first time, she saw not only the weary rancher, but the man beneath, the man who had lost, who had endured, who was willing to stand again this time, not just for himself, but for her. And in that moment, with the night heavy around them and danger pressing close, Elena felt something fierce and undeniable take root in her chest. It was not fear. It was belonging. The next morning broke with a sky the color of iron clouds, heavy and low, as if the heavens themselves were bracing for a storm. Elena woke before dawn, her body weary but her mind restless. She moved through the kitchen in silence, stoking the fire, setting coffee to brew, her hands trembling, though the house around her was still. Every shadow seemed to carry the echo of Harlan's threat, and each creak of the boards sounded like a footstep drawing near. When Ethan entered, boots already laced, rifle slung at his shoulder, she glanced up. His face was calm but hard, his eyes sharp with vigilance. He spoke little, only nodded in thanks when she slid a steaming mug across the table. Samuel tumbled in moments later, hair must rubbing sleep from his eyes. He climbed into Elena's lap without hesitation, as if he had always belonged there, and whispered Mama Elena without realizing he had said it aloud. The word pierced her heart, both painful and sweet. Ethan heard it too, and though he said nothing, the corner of his mouth tightened, betraying something he could not hide. The day's work pressed on. Elena tended to the house while Ethan mended fences along the property line. She watched him from a distance, his figure steady against the endless plain, the weight of his labor carried in the rhythm of hammer and nail. She thought of how he had stood before Harlan unflinching, shielding her with nothing but his word and his will. A man like that could not be measured by wealth or polish, but by the way he bore his burdens and protected those under his care. Yet peace held only by a thread. Near midday, dust rose on the horizon. 3 riders again, Harlan among them, though this time they did not remain at a distance. They came straight to the yard, dismounting with sharp jerks of the reins. Ethan met them, head-on, rifle cradled, but not aimed, his posture unyielding. Elena stood on the porch, Samuel clutching her skirt, his small body trembling. Harlan's voice cut the air. "Clark, you've made your choice, but you'll regret it. This land is not for strays. This woman will bring nothing but ruin, and the town will turn its back on you if you keep her." He turned his gaze to Elena, cold and condescending. "You think you found a home, but all you found is trouble." Elena's throat burned, but she lifted her chin. Her voice shook, but it carried. "I am not trouble. I am a woman who kept her word when you did not. If that makes me unwelcome, then perhaps it is not I who should be ashamed." Murmurs rose from the men behind Harlan, uncertain, uneasy. Ethan's jaw tightened, pride flickering in his eyes at her courage. Harlan sneered, mounting again. "You'll regret this," he said, spurring his horse sharply. Dust swallowed them as they rode off, leaving the threat heavy in the air. That night, silence wrapped the ranch tighter than any blanket. After Samuel had fallen asleep, Elena found Ethan on the porch, staring into the dark horizon where the riders had vanished. She stepped beside him, the chill seeping into her bones. "They will come again," she whispered. "Yes," Ethan said simply. His voice was calm, but underneath it ran a current of steel. She looked at him, the lamplight casting shadows across his face. "Why risk it?" she asked softly. "Why stand for me when it would be easier to let me go?" He turned then, meeting her eyes with a steadiness that stole her breath. "Because Samuel needs more than one pair of hands. Because no man with a soul abandons the truth when it comes knocking. And because, whether you realize it or not, this place feels less empty since you stepped into it." The words struck deep, leaving Elena trembling. She wanted to answer, to tell him of the way her heart had begun to anchor here. But before she could, the night split with the distant crack of a gunshot. Both froze, eyes snapping to the darkness beyond the yard. Another shot followed closer, this time the echo rolling through the hills. Ethan seized his rifle, every muscle taut. "Stay inside," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. Elena grabbed Samuel, carrying him back into the house, heart pounding. She set him in bed, whispering that everything was fine, though her voice shook. Through the thin walls, she heard the crunch of footsteps outside, the low murmur of men. The door rattled once hard, then fell still. Elena pressed Samuel close, her pulse racing. Outside, Ethan's voice cut through the night, sharp as a blade. "You fire another round on my land and you'll answer for it." The reply was laughter, cruel and mocking, fading as the riders pulled away into the dark. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunshots. Elena stood in the dim light, holding Samuel, her body shaking. When Ethan returned, his face was pale with fury, his hands clenched tight around the rifle. He looked at her, then at the boy, and for a moment the weight of what had nearly happened pressed all the air from the room. "They want to break us," Elena whispered. Ethan nodded, voice low. "Then we don't break." And though fear still wrapped itself around her like chains, Elena felt something burn hotter beneath it, a resolve she had not known she possessed. She was no longer the girl abandoned at a station. She was part of this fight now, and whatever storm Harlan brought, she would stand in it with Ethan and Samuel unyielding. The following days passed with a tension that clung to every corner of the ranch. Dawn no longer brought peace, but a restless watchfulness, each sunrise a reminder that Harlan and his men were never far. Elena rose early, tending to chores with steady hands, though her heart beat quick with unease. Samuel, sensing the heaviness in the air, grew quieter, clinging to her skirts, asking less about school and more about whether she would still be there when he woke the next morning. Each time she kissed his hair and whispered always, though the words cut sharp with the fear that she might not be able to keep them. Ethan worked harder than ever, his back bent beneath the weight of fence posts, his eyes always scanning the horizon. At night he sat by the door with his rifle across his knees, listening to the coyotes, the owls, the silence between. Elena often joined him, her shawl wrapped tight, sitting in the glow of a single lamp. Words between them were scarce, but their silence was not empty. It was an unspoken pact, two lives bound by the danger pressing closer. Then came Sunday morning when the church bell in town tolled faint across the plain. Elena dressed Samuel in his cleanest shirt, braiding his hair with careful fingers. Ethan watched his expression, unreadable, before finally saying, "We shouldn't go." Elena met his gaze and shook her head. "If we hide, they've already won." So they rode in together, wagon wheels clattering down the main street of Frontier Creek. Heads turned, whispers rose, but Elena held her chin high. She walked into the church beside Ethan, Samuel's small hand tucked in hers. The hymns rang hollow that morning, but when she knelt to pray, she felt strength fill her bones. Not strength from the congregation, but from the boy leaning against her and the man standing steady at her side. Yet Harlan was there too, seated near the front, his face calm, almost smug. When the service ended, he rose and spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "This town is no place for deceit, no place for outsiders who bring shame." His eyes cut to Elena like a blade. "We are a God-fearing community, and some blood does not belong among us." Gasps fluttered through the pews. Elena's cheeks burned, but before she could speak, Ethan stepped forward. His voice was low but firm, carrying to every corner of the room. "Shame lies not in heritage, but in breaking promises and scorning the innocent." He placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "This woman has done nothing but work with honesty and care. If you would cast her out, then you cast us out too." A hush fell. Some looked away ashamed, others glared with disapproval. Harlan's jaw clenched, his plans unsettled by Ethan's defiance. But he forced a smile, cold and thin. "So be it," he said, brushing past as he left the church. The days after grew darker. One morning, Elena found the chicken coop broken open, hens scattered, feathers littering the yard. Another evening, smoke curled on the horizon. Someone had set fire to a field near the fence line. Each act was small, calculated, meant to wear them down. Ethan cursed under his breath but refused to bend. One night long after Samuel had fallen asleep, Elena sat by the fire, sewing a tear in Ethan's shirt. He stood watching her, his eyes shadowed, his voice rough. "You didn't have to stay," he said. "You could have taken that train, spared yourself all of this." She met his gaze, her needle pausing. "I stayed because I saw something worth standing for. I stayed because Samuel needed me." Her voice softened. "And because so did you." For the first time, the hardness in Ethan's face cracked. He sat across from her, leaning forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know I don't want to face it without you." Her hands trembled, the shirt slipping into her lap. She wanted to speak, to answer, but before the words could form, the sharp crack of gunfire split the night. The lamp flickered. Samuel cried out from his room. Ethan leapt to his feet, rifle already in hand. "Stay with him," he ordered, his voice like steel. Elena scooped the boy into her arms, holding him tight as the shots rang again, closer this time, splintering wood from the barn. Smoke seeped through the cracks as flames licked upward into the sky. Outside, hooves thundered, men shouting. Laughter twisted into cruelty. Harlan had come, and this time he had not come alone. Elena's heart pounded as she rocked Samuel, whispering promises she prayed she could keep. The ranch shuddered under the assault, the world outside their walls burning bright with fire and fear. Ethan's silhouette stood tall against the window, rifle raised, the man of the house holding his ground against the storm. And Elena knew with a certainty that cut deeper than fear that the moment had come when choice would no longer be enough. Only courage could decide what would survive the night. The night roared alive with fire and fury. Flames from the barn threw wild shadows across the yard, turning the corral into a cage of light and smoke. Horses screamed, hooves clattering against wooden rails. Samuel buried his face in Elena's chest, trembling, his small arms clutching her neck. She whispered to him over and over words of comfort that shook with her own fear. "Stay with me. You're safe. I won't let go." Outside, Ethan's rifle cracked a sharp defiance against the night. A shout followed one of Harlan's men falling back into the dirt, but the others kept pressing, circling the house like wolves. Rocks smashed against shutters, shattering glass, letting in the stench of smoke. Elena coughed, pulling Samuel toward the corner furthest from the windows. The door rattled once, then twice as fists pounded against it. Ethan fired again, then slammed the bolt shut. His voice rang through the house, steady though ragged with strain. "Elena, take him to the cellar." But she shook her head, clutching the boy tighter. "Not without you." The pounding grew louder. Then Harlan's voice cut through the chaos, calm and cold. "Give her up, Clark. Send out the woman and we'll leave you be. She doesn't belong here." Elena felt her blood run cold. She looked to Ethan, his jaw, hard eyes blazing. He shouted back, "This is my land, my family. You'll never take either." A volley of gunfire tore through the walls, splinters raining across the floor. Samuel whimpered and Elena shielded him with her body. Smoke thickened, choking as the barn collapsed in a shower of sparks. The house groaned with the weight of fire licking at its edges. And then from deep inside her chest, something fierce awoke in Elena. She was no longer the girl abandoned at a station, no longer the one waiting for someone else to decide her worth. She set Samuel down gently, met his frightened eyes, and whispered, "You must be brave for me." Then she rose, gripping the iron poker from the hearth like a weapon. She stepped to the door, standing beside Ethan. His glance flicked to her, startled, but he did not tell her to go back. Instead, he nodded once, a soldier recognizing another soldier. Together, they faced the wood as it shuddered under blows. The door burst open and men surged through the smoke. Elena swung the poker, striking one across the arm, sending him staggering. Ethan fired the thunder of the rifle, deafening in the close space. Chaos erupted, shouts and smoke, and the clash of bodies. Harlan pushed forward, pistol raised, eyes locked on Elena. His sneer cut through the haze. "You'll ruin everything," he spat. "Women like you will never be more than baggage." But before he could fire, a cry pierced the smoke, Samuel standing in the corner, clutching his wooden horse. "Leave her alone," he shouted, voice small but burning with fury. Harlan's aim faltered for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, Ethan moved. He struck the pistol aside, and the two men crashed together, grappling in the firelight. Elena seized Samuel, dragging him back as sparks rained from the rafters. The fight raged, brutal and desperate, until Ethan slammed Harlan against the table. The gun skittered across the floor, and Elena kicked it hard, sending it into the flames. Harlan gasped, face twisted in rage. But when Ethan's fist landed one final time, he crumpled to the boards, groaning. The other men, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. Smoke choked the room, fire snapping hungrily at the walls. Ethan leveled his rifle, eyes cold. "Leave now or burn with him." They fled, scrambling into the night, their horses thundering away. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of fire and Samuel's sobs. Elena held him close, her body shaking, her heart hammering like a drum. Ethan stood over Harlan's fallen form, chest heaving, then finally dragged him out into the dirt, leaving him coughing and broken beneath the stars. By dawn, the barn was ash, the house blackened but standing. Neighbors came, drawn by the fire, their faces pale with shock. Some whispered of Harlan's cruelty. Others avoided Elena's gaze. But none could deny what they had seen. She had not broken, and neither had the family she had chosen. As the sun rose, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold, Elena stood beside Ethan and Samuel on the porch of the battered house. Her shawl was singed, her hands blistered, but her eyes were steady. Samuel tugged her sleeve, voice hushed. "You didn't leave. You stayed. You're my mama now, aren't you?" Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled, pulling him close. Yes, she whispered, I'm your mama. Ethan looked at her. Then the weariness in his face softened by something deeper. He reached for her hand, rough and scarred, and she took it without hesitation. The three of them stood together, the smoke of the past drifting away, the future uncertain, but theirs to claim. And in that fragile morning light, Elena realized that the cruelest rejection had led her here, to the very place she was meant to belong, to the family she was destined to fight for and to love.